Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the main stage here at FTT Digital Builder. This is going to be a really fun panel, and everyone knows I like to have fun with headlines for sessions. So this one is called Techies Are From Mars and Business is from Venus. And so I apologize to any pop culture books of the past 30 years that I'm borrowing from. Whole day talking about toolkits and open APIs and the stuff that we use to build the digital world, the modern world, and financial services. But as we've seen in many of the discussions, a lot of issues come down to culture and communication and people. And I think this panel is really going to get into collaboration and communication. So I think we're going to have a really great discussion. So as a way of introducing you to our panel, I'm going to ask them where they sort of stand in this collaboration ecosystem, because as we know, business provides and technology enables, and there are lots of different players whenever we put together a project and try to build a team, build a department, build a product. There are a lot of different players in that group, and sometimes you need some diplomats and translators and hostage negotiators. So I want to find out where everyone on our panel finds themselves. So as I mentioned, this panel is about collaboration, it's about communication. So to start out as an introduction, I want to ask everyone, are you team techie? Are you team business? Are you from Mars? Are you from Venus? So I'm going to start off with Jamie from RBS. Jamie, what team are you on?
Hi there, everyone. So Jamie Broadbent from RBS International. And I guess my role is to lead digital innovation and design. And so in that space, would definitely see myself as a dual citizen, sometimes diplomat, sometimes translator, sometimes a bit of a peacemaker, but definitely that go-between that ensures that that both sides are happy and can work to their best effect.
Excellent, thank you. So Peter, I'm going to go on to you. What team are you on?
Well, I wouldn't separate it as two separate teams, frankly. In my view, it's all part of one universe at the end of the day, right? So we are all trying to build a product for our customers that they will like and enjoy. For sure, there is slightly different cultures on the more commercial people and on more technological people. But at the same time, I think that we are all exactly in this fintech transformation stage where they are really coming together. Yes, sometimes it's a painful journey, and you definitely need the good diplomatic and communication skills in order to be able to bridge between the two. But over the last few years, I think that all banks are experiencing that their teams are actually growing together, whether it's by design or by nature, commercial people understanding that there is no way without them being actually deeply involved on the tech side and understanding the deliverables, and on the other side, the IT people understanding that if they will just remain a silo, then probably they're in the wrong industry already, because the industry is transitioning as such.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm moving on to Talika now, and I'm very excited to hear what team you think you're on, since I know you recently moved from a large incumbent bank to a digital bank. So Talika, introduce yourself to us.
Hi everyone, Tulika Maheshwari here. I am Vice President for Strategic Services at Monzo Bank. But as Liz mentioned, I've got about 15 plus years in financial services, and then the last role that I had was at a large bank. So I'm certainly seeing the contrast between large and small. And we'll talk more about that. In terms of which team I'm on, I have to say both, right? And I completely agree with what you just said. You can't be one or either. In this day and age, you have to be both team techie and both team business. In terms of hostage negotiator, diplomat, translator, I think all of us are all of those. Hopefully, most of the time, it's diplomat and translator. And if you have enough of shared context and enough of sort of, a common mission, you're not really in hostage negotiations too often. But certainly, yeah, a diplomat and a translator first and foremost, and just sometimes a negotiator as well.
Excellent. Yvonne, I want to hear from you on what team you're on, and introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So Yvonne Swainston, I work at Deutsche Bank, and the colleagues here, it's a collaboration type role. I'd use the word influencer as well, definitely as part of that. Historically, after 20 plus years working in banking, have been lucky enough to work in Mars and Venus, shall we say, on both sides, and very much looking forward to the conversation today about how things are changing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And last but very much not least, Aretha, tell us what team you find yourself in today by introducing yourself.
Thank you, Liz. I'm Aretha. I'm founder and CEO of Project Imagine, which carries two brands, Dozens for the B2C market in the UK, and Pi One, which is our B2B tech stack for banks and asset managers around the world. So my answers will be colored from my previous role, which was a decade and a half in HSBC, and sort of the divide in a large corporation, or how people like us try to solve it in smaller setups, in startups. And since both techie and business have been taken a couple of times, I'm going to go for the third one, which is team design. So I'm hovering somewhere around International Space Station near planet Earth, not quite team design, but close to it. Because, at the end of the day, even for our two B2C and B2B problems, getting users to save and getting banks to transform technology are completely dependent on good tech and constrained by profitability metrics, but eventually will decide and depend on whether the users see the benefits to be big enough to go through what they perceive as problems. So I choose team design any day, even if it's a bit of a cop-out, but obviously the right answer is a bit of everything.
Bit of everything, yes. I think probably we'll get to that bit of everything at the end. So, but my next question, is kind of, I think we all would describe ourselves as being in the fintech space, and I think sometimes it can be hard to realize that there are other people in financial services who don't live and breathe technology as much as some of us do, and you still get a lot of people in banks, in different parts of the bank and financial services, who kind of openly reject the fintech label as some sort of other. And I think I read the other week an Accenture survey which said that only 10% of bank boards have people on it with any sort of professional technical experience. So I'm just wanting to know about this, is there like kind of an inherent banker snobbery towards tech and building and digital delivery solutions still going on in the industry? So I'll go to Yvonne first. Especially with your role in the Innovation Lab at Deutsche Bank. Is there still a little bit of banker snobbery against sort of what they see as the tech and the other?
I think historically, definitely, not snobbery per se, but definitely a divide in the way they work. So one was the revenue generator, the other was the service. I think that's changing over time. People are becoming more... it's becoming more of a partnership as you move on. There's a lot of big companies now who are competitors to us, who are pure tech companies. So it's recognizing that the technology is really needed. Deutsche Bank itself had its first management board member as a techie, Bert Lucard, who joined in 2019. So things are changing in our space, and it's interesting to watch where that's going.
Interesting. So I'm going to go to Lisa now. We've got two HSBC veterans on the panel. So are you seeing this that there are some in your experience, in your past experience, there's some people that really reject that sort of fintech label as other, and is there this sort of very much a divide between people who think they're the banking business and then the people who are in digital delivery?
It's a great question, actually. I think in my wearing a large bank hat, I'd say fintech typically means the challenger, sort of smaller brands. It's interesting, people who are in tech in big banks don't still consider themselves as probably fintech. So there is definitely a sort of a typology that's been created around fintech. But I think equally what I'd say, I don't see that as snobbery. I think it's almost from a large bank perspective, very few people have that sort of combination of business, tech, commercial, product, customer design, and it's almost maybe not snobbery, it's almost being scared, I would say, because there is a realization that actually that is really needed in today's day and age. We need to be at the cusp of product, customer, tech, commercial, all of that together. So I think it's more an envy rather than snobbery. I think what helps in a sense is, is almost that cover or couch of, banking is complicated, banking regulation is complicated, and therefore that's the bit we can hold on to and we can understand, and that's the sort of the differentiator we bring. But it's, I think, overall a view of sort of envy and a little bit of being scared as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on. Yep. I'm going to move on to my.
I would totally agree with
go
that. Sorry, yeah. Well, you allowed us to step in, and I'm just.
No, I know, and I know I should have realized, Peter, that you would do that. So I'm going to be. Please make more comment.
Well, you know me. You know me already. But I totally agree about this. Look, I think I wouldn't call it kind of a generational thing, but I think in terms of a transition the industry is going through, I think for sure it is the fear which was raised simply because right now you as a modern a banker of today's age, you really need to have a much wider set of skills in the way you approach technology and delivery overall, and product design actually, and product delivery, and I mean the whole bunch of it. And I just feel that there were people in the past who felt this discomfort, but at the same time, I think, again, because of the change that whole industry is going through, and it's really a fundamental change, which has been allowed really by a digital era, right, in our industry, right, and has been pushed through post crisis. I think that there were some people initially which were insecure about it, I guess, right, but you just see less and less of them now in the industry because it's clear that the direction is only one way.
So Peter, I'm actually going to stay with you. I mean, sort of to ask the other side of the coin. I mean, I've seen a few times in my career that there are people who get very excited about emerging technologies for very understandable reasons, and then kind of fail to explain how these tools can be used to solve business problems. Do you think sometimes that excitement over emerging technologies really doesn't translate very well to the business side at times?
Look, I think that is part of the maturity of organizations, and it does happen sometimes in the bigger organization. The more difficult it is actually to implement something and start getting the benefits out of it. But with smaller teams, and again, with teams which have a kind of both the capabilities and the right mindset in today's environment, I think that they really understand that the business actually case and the real value that the implementation delivers is key. And in my experience, actually, I've always had people driving the technological implementations, unless they're just pure infrastructure play, really driving by the actual people who were going to benefit from the value that technology was gonna deliver. And IT was part of that drive, of course, but the lead was at the end of the day on a commercial side, because if they are not involved, if business people are not involved right from the beginning, unfortunately, again, out of my personal experience, the failure rate was substantially higher. So getting that balance right of the team setup and right motivation is really very important.
So I'm gonna bring in Jamie next, and then I'm gonna go to Aretha afterwards. I'm gonna sort of combine the sort of two sides of the coin questions that I'm answering. So Jamie, I'm going to go to you. I mean, you mentioned before in your first answer that you are a dual citizen. Are you still seeing this sort of pushback against people who think they are the business and they can't really communicate with the tech? And then on the other side, are you seeing people getting sort of much more excited about the tech side of the business and not knowing how to translate how these can be used to solve problems? So Jamie, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, so I definitely see both, and that's why dual citizens like me can command a premium, because I guess I'll get a lot of conversations or phone calls from even senior executives within our business, and it will start with things like, look, Jamie, I'm not a tech person, I'm not a techie, give it to me in plain English. And so that's helpful in one sense, that I can kind of be that translator, but at the same time, I recognize it's not a snobbery, but a vulnerability in probably some senior bank leaders that have forged their careers being very focused on business and commercial outcomes, and recognize that now they preside over businesses that have quickly become kind of technology companies first and foremost. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to really help solve for that vulnerability, and in a non-patronizing way, help senior executives really gain an interest and quickly get an appreciation for technical issues, which are fundamentally the bread and butter of what the bank is built on today. At the same time, I think there are absolutely armies of technologists in the bank that would love to speak in technical terms, or would love to get hung up on a particular technology and, oh, look what it allows, but not ever translate that into, well, what value does it add for the business? What value does it add for the customer? Where do you commercialize that? And so I think it is incumbent on both sides of that fence to really up their game and upskill, so that you can become that dual citizen, or be able to be kind of bilingual in both camps. The more people that we're able to kind of get where they have a happy appreciation of both sides, the better the organization will perform. And so that's why it's incumbent on us as translators to also teach that skill and create more translators.
Interesting. So Aretha, I have to bring you into this conversation because there's been a lot said, and I'm really, really interested, with your background at large incumbent banks, and then as a fintech founder, CEO, how are you seeing how people react in sort of the traditional bank environment and the very, very business side, and sort of an aversion to tech, and how are you seeing how sometimes people enamored, that's the word I'm looking for, with emerging tech and their ability to sort of show how they can solve problems. Rachel, I'm going to bring you into the conversation now.
Cool, thank you. It's probably good to remember that I literally had to cross the divide myself. For the first 8-9 years of my life, I wore suits and went to Canary Wharf, and that was my image of banking. And I'd already moved between investment banking and trading and principal M&A, so I'd done a bunch of stuff. So it wasn't like one room for 8 years, but yet my image of banking had not changed. And sometime around then, when HSBC's private bank was talking of replacing its core banking system, and from a kind of strategy standpoint, I was trying to understand the risks in that process and how many years that was going to take, and how little people around the table that were making these decisions understood of the nitty-gritties, not the kind of strategic impacts, of course everyone understands that, but costs and benefits and risks, but exactly where things can go wrong, and where the plumbing is, and where the wiring is, and why is it that when you take a off-the-shelf system and try to make it yours, then the vendors stop supporting it? Where do all these issues arise? And I kind of took a conscious choice to give away that banking premium or even momentum to try and enter the digital space. And not many bankers are in a position to do that, right? Like if you're 20, 30 years in and you have that moment, then you don't even have that choice of trying to get to the other side. Then your best bet is a translation in the middle. So hence you're getting the questions on like, I'm not a technologist, like what's this mean in plain English? Because otherwise you can't even survive. On the other hand, you also know that there is a question of like HTD, hype-driven development, or RDD, resume-driven development, because tech moves so fast. Of course, people in the tech space want to stay up with the latest technologies. And the latest technologies are not necessarily always proved to the extent that banks want, because their inherent job is to keep customers' money safe. So you can see the divide, and you can see that there's going to be very few right answers, and a lot will depend on quick iteration. And what the debate should therefore, I think, become in a good working space is, what are those contexts and surroundings and environments that you need for quick iterations? Because neither side knows the debate really well, or the answer really well. And therefore you have like agile, and therefore you have quick, release cycles, and maybe kind of spaces with whiteboards for walls and not like conference room settings. These are all getting you towards quicker iterations because no one knows the answer, because it's not been done yet. And I think if you start from that place of empathy, you're much more likely to get to the right people and the right outcomes than trying to decide if suits are the right thing. Like, I think you shouldn't wear suits to design. It's a ridiculous, it's just not an outfit that you think in. But equally, if you have to go for a board presentation, I've seen them getting completely whacked out of shape because someone decided to show up in a pair of shorts and because they were relaxed in it. Like, that's not the right debate to have. The right debate is just what is going to get us to quicker outcomes that are better for our customers, right? So I think if both sides started a little bit with empathy, like, again, maybe a bit of a cop-out, but I've actually seen this play out in real life. Even if you get to the same outcomes, you're much more likely to succeed.
I like that empathy. I like that very much. And I know you mentioned two things: wearing suits and commuting into Canary Wharf, which seems like ancient history right at the moment. Something we did a very, very long time ago.
Liz,
I want to move.
sorry, can
No,
I
go
jump
in.
in?
Go in. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Talika.
So I think that point around empathy, I completely agree. I would add to that is, to some extent, you need a stash of cash as well. So you can iterate as much as you want, but in my view, there is new tech essentially is new, and therefore it has the pitfalls and it has the complexities, and people don't have patience, right? People don't. You can be agile, you can make mistakes, but people don't have patience. And I've been on that side of being the business person who was asked to take us into the cloud and use a new vendor, etc. And frankly, we had an absolute roller coaster, and I was, very, very dark moments in some ways. What would have helped, along with all of that support, would have been just a bit of cash on the side to say, okay, go learn, go make mistakes, go figure out. Because otherwise, that constant sort of challenge of, this is great, this sounds great, but it's not delivering yet. And can you just make it go faster? That does end up being a hard slog in many ways. So agree with everything we've said. I'd just add a little bit of cash on the side to sort of lubricate to make soften the blows and make things faster and easier as well.
More cash and resources. Yes, I think that solves a lot of problems. I might want to stay with you, Talika, though, and just because when you talked a little bit about this sort of, freedom to maybe make mistakes and to fail a bit. I mean, I think with any sort of, any new project or new technology, and I think you learn the most through failure. I mean, where have been some of the, you don't need to go into specifics, but some of the worst types of sort of this failure in collaboration, this failure in communication that you've seen in your 15 years of experience?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Frankly, many a time, right? I think all of us probably have been in many of those conversations where you kind of have heard this pitch about this new piece of software or product that's going to be the panacea for everything. It's going to solve customer problems or kind of stakeholder problems. And then it lands after many, many months of a lot of work and a lot of kind of resources being tied up. And then it's not what it was meant to be. It either flops or it doesn't work or it's just harder to integrate with. All sorts of problems. And I think, to me, always the issue, if I kind of unpick it and, all of the various sort of context around it, it's typically been around people not speaking to each other. It's as simple as people not having a shared context, not trying to solve the same problem together in the right way, picking different parts of the problem rather than thinking about what is it together that we're solving for. And it's literally every single time it's just been about people, how they're structured, how they're communicating with each other, and the sort of the mission they're on. And which is why I think when I think about building teams now and I think about kind of missions, for me, the starting point really is how are we organizing people so that we can make them more effective, and then we get on a journey and sort of iterate, but avoid those sort of pitfalls that, again, I've seen many, many times in my career.
So yeah, I wanted to move on to yep.
Yeah, I mean, Liz, just to step in, I really like actually, and what Anika said before, and I think it's one of the key points actually, and the key complexities between bringing this kind of IT and commercial people, because in banks this price of mistake tends to be very high, and that's why banks avoid. Right, and banks teams avoid anything that could lead to those mistakes. Whilst actually the only way to innovate, as you rightly said, right, the only way to progress, the only way to test is to learn, to try, right? Sometimes fail, right? As all of the kind of big IT giants nowadays do, right? I mean, they have multiple failed projects, and they're absolutely okay about it as long as they learn from those mistakes. And I think that this is the key issue of changing the culture of financial industry, actually, in order to bring them to Venus and Mars closer together, really is to free up this ability to make mistakes and to learn on them, because that's actually one of the biggest problems that I've seen in the industry. Because of those mistakes and because of the shorter cycles, suddenly the people are blamed by one side or another. They depart, and the learning has departed actually with those people as well, right? And that's big, and then it ends up a double fail actually for the organization. So giving that space exactly for mistakes and understanding is, I think, is extremely important in order to bridge the gap.
Yeah,
I
wanted to. Yeah.
to that. It just feels a bit like it's easier to visualize the bank problem, like banks don't give you money or the freedom to sort of innovate, so then innovation becomes harder. But I think if you extend it to sort of financial services where we are regulated and we have to keep some stuff, it's almost like airlines, right? Like safety is a big constraint. It extends to startups as well. And we had a conversation recently about, we're on a native app structure right now. And obviously, like, the engineers will continue to want to push towards any form of synergy. And, if you can get the business logic for both iOS and iOS into one, and, it's a very religious debate that's been around for ages. But every time I hear it, something has changed and something new has come on and someone has to present something new. But it stays as religious. Now, whether we take that experiment as a startup or not depends on our risk appetite for this particular part of the problem in all the problems that we have to deal with, right? And if we're taking customer risk or like sort of pushing the envelope on certain things that hit the customer on certain aspects that are like, let's say, financial product related for us, we choose to not write the latest technology when it comes to technological experiments. Maybe like at least one or two giants have adopted it in the last 1 or 2 years, which still means it's pretty modern, but it's not 3 months old. So that's not a bank or a startup thing. That's us being clear that this particular experiment is outside the bits that we have risk appetite for, even as a nimble startup. And if banks could do the same and understand that certain things are impossible to get done without that iteration and that experimentation thing, and therefore whet up internal appetite for that experimentation, I think that's the step that precedes that budget and space that we are seeking over here.
Mm. I have to bring in the two people who work at large incumbent banks right at the moment into this discussion about learning from failure and giving examples for this. So I'll go to Yvonne first. What are some of the cases of failure of collaboration? I know you mentioned that you were a bit of an influencer in your organization, but what are some of the cases that you've seen and what have you learned from it?
Yeah, so to resonate what other people spoke on, I think Peter hit the nail on the head in that we're a risk adverse financial services, and the big companies are more risk adverse and they don't have the risk appetite to experiment. And you've seen some companies spin off separate subsidiaries or separate entities to be able to do that. To date, not so successful, but are getting there. There's lots of constraints around the regulatory side, the data, access to data. Our regulators are always looking at us. That is an element that is seen as a blocker and not an enabler. So trying to sort of remove that blocker and work on things doesn't always have the best success. I also think there is still sometimes a blame culture, as we've seen, and that fail fast concept hasn't really hit across the whole of the banking culture yet. So there's still a lot of work to be done in that space. And looking at, where we're going to move next, I think really changing that culture from the top down, and the top down being a lot of our business partners, to understand that to have success, we do need to experiment. I think somebody else mentioned as well, a lot of the other big tech companies, they're the ones who are doing this really successfully and really are our competitors to look out for, but not as heavily regulated as us. So, something to watch there.
Interesting. So Jamie, I'll go to you for comment on this discussion right now. I mean, where are some of the failures of collaboration and the learning from experience that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the failures, as was previously outlined, has always come from this kind of siloed thinking, different incentives or objectives, different desired outcomes, and then we kind of get to the end of a delivery, and commercial people say that's not what we wanted, or technology people say, well, that's what you asked for. So it really is about, you've got to break down those silos and make sure that everyone is aligned around the same purposes. To that second question about banks being failure averse. I think that's definitely true. Banks don't like to fail; they like ROI, and I think historically that's been because of the way that investors have demanded performance from banks, right? Everything's driven on quarterly cycles, like you've got to hit your numbers for this quarter and hit the yearly revenue targets and all that kind of stuff. And therefore, banks have always prioritized delivery in the here and now as opposed to innovating for the future, because delivery pays in the short term, whereas innovation pays off kind of longer term. I think that's starting to change. And the attitudes of bank investors now are such that they want evidence that the bank is playing the long game. And it's less about today's numbers and more about what are you doing to ensure that you're investing now so that the bank will be here in the future. And all of our investors and analysts want conversations about kind of APIs and ecosystems and the purpose that the bank serves. And so I think this is refreshing, and this is helping the bank to start and recognize, actually, do you know what? We've got to make sure that we've got the balance. Yes, we need to still deliver in the here and now. That's what pays people's wages. But if you want to pay pensions, then you've got to innovate. You've got to be relevant for the future. And I think we're starting to see that balance get much better.
Have you seen, I know you mentioned, investors and expectations, but inside the bank, have sort of metrics and bonus structures, have they caught up with that type of change in mindset, or do you think that those things are still a blocker?
So it's a journey, and one I would describe as kind of a work in progress. I think far more now, people's incentives are focused on doing the right thing for the long term, and kind of performance bonuses, which are based on hitting short-term numbers, are rapidly becoming kind of extinct. It takes a long time, and even if you kind of change the incentives, you've got to change the culture and the mindset. There are people that have kind of cut their teeth in the old system, and it feels very alien to them now to have a very different reward structure. But like I said, I think it's a welcome change, and it comes with time.
I'm gonna go to Yvonne now. I mean, we during this my description of this panel, I was very simplistic and talked about the business and the tech. But there's a lot of other different departments and different players in any of these projects. So Yvonne, what role does sort of operations play in these projects and collaborations from both a positive and a negative point of view?
And in large companies, you'll have multiple teams that are working on the one project, and that's why it's so important when you're setting up something that you are setting up them organizationally with all the parties involved that you need there. I mean, I quite often find that you can quite often get business and technology to connect now on the new thing that they want to do, and then you've got a lot of other functions that will want to be involved, from risk to finance to operations to compliance, etc., who will all play a part in the delivery of what you're trying to achieve. And it's so important to get them all together. I mean, it's positive that we have all these groups. The engagement is there, especially at our company. I think negatively, too many parties with too many different opinions can be really difficult to manage, and that's where things become a lot more complicated. The decision-making tree becomes a lot harder to know. I mean, simplistic terms, if you have business and tech, you've got your product owner making the decisions for you and your tech delivering for you, and that's great, but quite often it's not as straightforward as that. So there's some of the things that we're contending at the moment.
We're having a slight technical problem with Yvonne, but hopefully when we get back to the next question, we'll get her back. But I think we got the gist of what she was saying. So I'm going to focus on the last two questions for our entire panel. And I'm going to start with Talika for this one. You know, we talked a little bit about failure. We talked about barriers. I want to talk about some of the frameworks maybe that you've sort of come up in your head based on your experience for building that successful bridge between, as Yvonne mentioned, the many different players with many different opinions on various projects. So Talika, what are some of the frameworks that you know kind of work for better collaboration?
Yeah, and I have to say I've been very, very fortunate to, in the last sort of 4 years, have led the sort of from the beginning, from concept to launch of a new venture for HSBC called HSBC Kinetic. And Noel Quinn, who is our sponsor and now the CEO as well, he gave us a lot of autonomy, along with sort of Barry O'Byrne and the other leadership, to really think about doing things differently. So one of the first things we did was actually have a team of teams, in a sense, whether it was tech, whether it was ops, whether it was our risk colleagues. We actively brought them into the fold pretty much from day one to be part of every conversation. And I completely understand the point that was just made around maybe there are too many people sometimes and it's really hard. But actually, conversely, not having those people making mistakes is also extremely hard. So, as an example, with operations, what I found was that operations, in a sense, when things go wrong, they're the ones who bear the brunt, right? It's almost considered the sort of extensible asset, much more so than maybe business and tech, that can take on some of the pitfalls in the short term. So bringing them into the fold and actually having them pretty much day one meant that they were thinking about all of the reasons where things could go wrong, and they would be the ones kind of catching, the challenges. Similarly, we had a lot of our second line, etc., all very much involved. So I think in terms of frameworks, that kind of team of teams that has the right constituents from the very beginning and has I think without saying common mission, shared purpose, etc., that's absolutely a must. And often, actually, as much as we say it's a must, it doesn't happen enough. But having those sort of comms, but then reiterating and making sure that there's a constant communication loop through the various ceremonies, whether it's your stand-ups and your coming together for various sort of elaboration sessions, etc. I think some of those are absolutely really important in making sure we continue the dialogue. And the last one, in terms of frameworks, I think what I found was and I've mentioned this, the structure of the teams. And we did find that over the course of our growth, the same structure didn't work always. As soon as we probably went through sort of 3 structure changes in 3 years, purely because of how we were in that particular phase of growth, which just meant we need to reorganize ourselves again. So I think some of those things were really helpful in kind of driving our success and taking us to launch and now in the market. Certainly, that's my experience, Liz, of from the last few years.
So not so much frameworks, but being flexible. The changes, yeah. So Jamie, yeah. So Jamie, I'm going to move on to you. What are some of the frameworks that you have seen work for successful projects?
Yeah, so certainly the way in which we organize ourselves now is changing. It's less about having kind of silos, risk over here and technology over there and commercials over here. But actually, we kind of form ourselves now in squads where you've got a mix up of constituent parts from each of those. And so your home team doesn't become the function that you belong to, but your home team's actually the group of people that you've been brought in to work on a particular project or program. And that's a multidiscipline team. And I think over time, that is helping to break down the historic silos and help people get a deeper appreciation of kind of where everybody else is coming from. I think over and above that, it's also just kind of the way in which we build a culture of curiosity and learning. So, commercial people providing bank-wide seminars, lunch and learns that tech people can dial into and get a deeper appreciation of some of the business challenges that we're trying to solve for, and vice versa. Technologists that will provide dial in seminars about like, this is open banking, this is APIs, this is what it means, and helping you get a deeper appreciation of those things. And then last but not least, I think at the most senior level, it is this correcting the balance between kind of bankers that preside around the top table and starting to move beyond that kind of token technologist to really getting fair representation of the organization that we've become at the most senior level. I think you started off the call even with a stat about something like 10% of boards have technology representation. That's just flat wrong for organizations which have such a dependency on technology. And so I think as we start and address the leadership gap and we get better representation there, that then permeates through the rest of the organization as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'll move on to Yvonne. What are some of the frameworks that you've seen work successfully in the past?
Yeah, and I'd echo what everyone said. I think having a shared vision and strategy is really, really important. That's sort of, fostered from the top down. So everybody's on the same page on the journey they're going on. Those multi-skilled teams are really, really important. I just want to bring sort of diversity and inclusion into the mix as well. It's really important that you get the right skills and diversity across the group so that you're going to deliver it in the most effective way. And making sure that, we have the right, but we talk about the framework, but the right setup so that everything's understood from the offset and everybody's at the start of that journey. I think one of the other small challenges we've seen as well is with regulators sometimes having to be part of those teams and part of that journey with you. And I think I've seen more success more recently with engaging very early on in what you aspire to do, not showing them the end output, but this is what we're looking at. What do you think of this idea very early in that process, so you can get that feedback?
Interesting. I'm sensing a theme with all the answers. A lot, full communication, getting everyone on board, being flexible. So Peter, I'm going to go to you. What are some of the frameworks that you've seen work in your experience?
Well, you're right regarding sensing the theme, I think, because we are all battling at the end of the day the same issues, and I think of course organization matters, of course the end goal matters, and the design of a process in the teams, but for me it's ultimately about culture, right? And sorry, Jamie has so I have my little notes here. We don't have the names underneath the pictures, so sorry about that. But Jamie, I think, very rightly said about curiosity, right? And I think that this is exactly the real time for this, curiosity inside the industries which are changing, right? And the people who have that curiosity, who have a drive, right, they don't need to only realize themselves as natural born entrepreneurs, but they could actually realize them exactly in companies which are going through an extremely rare, right, moments in their development stage. And the more of that curiosity you have amongst the people who are actually driving the change, right, whether on tech or on the commercial side, the better, I think, the long-term outcomes are, both for the organization and eventually, of course, for the end consumers. For me, that culture built around that openness and curiosity and ability to make mistakes and not be immediately fired for them, right, but actually try to take out the learnings, that creates the right environment to really deliver. And creating that whole environment, that's what is the biggest goal in front of us, right? And it's constantly a moving target.
Interesting. So, Aretha, I'll go to you. What are some of the frameworks that you've seen work in the past that you that have been successful?
So I'm going to try and answer it on that point of empathy. So maybe a framework and then more of a kind of bridging example so that helps people communicate better. Maybe start off with a bridging example. So, because I had to make the journey myself and I was so used to Excel and PowerPoint, the first time I heard of middle layer or like business logic and all of this stuff. And what do you mean? All the stuff is not happening on my phone? No, it's happening on a server somewhere and all these connections. The analogy that sort of stuck to me was basically CSV files in an Excel that get processed on a pivot table and then eventually put into a PowerPoint. And I had, as an investment banking analyst, lived the days and nights of a PowerPoint having very kind of, pasted graphs that no one can change. And that's basically your hard-coded stuff. And if you wanted to do it the right way, then you needed to get access to the pivot table so you can change it around without affecting the raw data or the front end. And, that's sort of how a lot of service structures got. It helped me a lot within HSBC to use that analogy and, explain what we were trying to do on the digital side. And that's sort of an example of where we found common language, right? So, kind of front end, back end, middleware sort of being explained to people who've never interacted with it using something that they interact with every day, which comes from that culture and empathy bit. And similarly, I think apart from language, the one other thing that trips these two sides, business and tech, up is just a common sense of urgency or the lack of it. If they could only define how much is good time to get something done in, that should automatically sort of create the debate for what's the right budget or what's the right risk appetite. So the old iron triangle of good, fast, cheap, I don't think that gets used in banking as much as it does in tech. And that's really easy to understand that you can have only two of those three things. So therefore, what are you going to compromise when you give me this scope and this budget? Those conversations can be brought upwards. And a kind of derivation of that we've started to use successfully at PI is OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. And if every single thing that you're working on is in one of those four columns, then you're forced to ask the sponsor or whoever's the decision maker, when are we meant to act by? Because, of course, that means that there is risk appetite to make some mistakes. Otherwise, we're stuck in observe or decide forever. And again, even in a small startup, you can see different teams operating to different momentums on that loop. And that's what causes the issue, although they're all sort of have subscribed to the new way of working and culture and all of that. So these are deeply behavioral topics that, frameworks can only attempt to get to. At its heart is still trying to create empathy.
Great. So why don't we end our discussion on a happy note? So I'm going to ask all of you, maybe if you can mention a specific project that fills you with happy memories of a financial services fintech bank project that went well. So Aretha, I'm going to stay with you. What have been some of your happiest memories with business and tech collaboration?
I mean, it's obviously biased towards the startup I helped start or created. So all of Project Imagine would qualify for that project. We even kept project in the name for this. But maybe a more serious answer is from my time back in HSBC, because that's where it was harder in a way, right? Like recruiting and retaining talent is harder in a startup for sure, because you've got to kind of create that proposition for the employees and talent. But in HSBC, it was about like a true win of when translation would win. And I think one of the one of the fastest deliveries that I was part of was the trading app in Hong Kong, and that's basically no different to what Tulika was saying in terms of how she approached what was it, kinetic, right? Like everyone from these different teams being forced into a room from day one. And on day one, there's a lot of blank stares and people who don't understand each other, maybe have not even been part of a meeting together. And at the end of 12 months, you've got something that they're all proud of, that's been built from scratch, completely new design that didn't exist before, live in the customer's hands, and then ready for iteration from then on. And that 12-month journey was, whatever I do later on in life, I would take away a lot of learnings from that.
Interesting. So Yvonne, I'm going to move on to you to help close us out on. Can you give us one of your happiest memories?
Yeah, I've actually got a couple. So one of them was a large regulatory project at Deutsche Bank, very successfully delivered in 18 months in a very agile way. Everybody got involved, full collaboration, and I think it was made so much easier by the fact, well, not easier, but we had very hard deadlines to meet. So, there was a common goal. We all knew what we had to do and we had to get there. And really good for a good example of an execution project that went really, really well. My other one that I really, really enjoyed and I learned so much from was a few years ago when I worked at Bank of America and working on a client-facing application and going on, using the new tools that were sort of newer then 8-9 years ago of design thinking and, user journeys and being able to start appreciating those tools and methodologies on how to successfully deliver something that your customers really want and taking the customer along for the journey, which was fairly new back then in those larger organizations.
Interesting. Well done. Yeah, I love hearing the past history stories of how far we've come. So Peter, I'm going to go to you. Give us a final happiest memory story.
Well, actually, I'm gonna just jump off what Yvonne said because probably one of my most interesting recent projects, because there has been many of them, is actually exactly with collaboration between the product team, between the technology team, and the client. As a bank which is a leader in Southeastern Europe in point of sale finance. It's very important for us that we deliver tools which are extremely lean and valuable for the merchants in order to actually help them sell more. So, whenever you are required to create another technology for the merchants that, that already have tons of their own, it is quite an exercise. But when you get them involved in the feedback that you receive, right, and then it's really an agile experience in terms of that loop of communication that has really delivered enormous value for both our organization and for our merchant partners. So that has probably been one of the most exciting recent ones that come to my mind.
I love all of you that have more than one happy memory to share. It's really good. So Talika, I'm going to move on to you. Why don't you close us off with your happiest memory?
So I'll mention, actually it is a specific memory, and I think about it because it happened pretty much almost a year ago around this weekend. But as most of you know, right, when you actually, the rubber hits the road and you're trying to go launch and you're going in and getting all of those various sign-offs from all of the various stakeholders, that's probably the hardest bit about product building in a regulated financial services, as I'm sure you know. And I think almost a year ago, we were in that sort of phase where we were, the roller coaster of COVID had happened. We were looking to launch fairly quickly, given some of the context of the UK economy, etc. And I remember this weekend where we were on a call, bank holiday weekend, when we were on a call where we had all of the various constituents, the same ones I mentioned: operations, product, risk, etc. And it just felt like a really well-tuned orchestra where, we were all sort of, yes to everything. It all sort of flowed really well. And all of those challenges that you typically think about in having siloed teams and, kind of broken communication, that was not there. And yeah, I think as a sort of a leader, as a product builder, that felt like, a really, really sort of successful moment and a memory I will carry for a while.
There's nothing like a pandemic to get everyone on the same page. Interesting time. So Jamie, why don't you have our final word? Why don't you give us your happiest memory?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I've been building banking propositions for over a decade. So when someone says, like, what's your favorite one, what's your proudest memory, it's like saying, well, which of your kids do you love the most? What I would say though is it's very seldom the thing, right? It's very seldom the product or the app or the platform that you build that you're most proud of. It's the journey that got you there. And as I look back and think about the experiences of having kind of built things over the years, the happiest moments are where that journey has been effective, where people have kind of all bought into the vision and had this kind of sense of shared clarity around what we were doing and the difference that it would ultimately make. The team came together well. There was kind of radical candor. People would challenge directly because they care passionately. We worked actively with customers. We would test, we would learn. And then ultimately what you deliver is, yes, something that's very special that delivers value to the end user, whether that's the customer or the business. But really the thing that you've built is you've built people, you've built their knowledge, their capability, you've built relationships that last well beyond that particular delivery. And I guess, in recent years, those journeys have been getting better because they're better understood and they're less erratic in terms of, oh, we didn't get sign off, we didn't involve that person. Now we know the constituent parts that make that effective journey, and so we're becoming much better at delivering that in a repeatable way. So some good memories, and I think still a lot still to come.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, Aretha, Yvonne, Peter, Talika, and Jamie, thank you so much for closing off FTT Digital Builder, a day of great discussion, debate, and chat with this conversation. I think we now know that, it doesn't matter whether you're from Venus or Mars. We all need to be on the same page and communicate and be flexible. So thank you so much. And good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye, guys.